Welcome to the Family Beacon podcast from Minnesota Family Council with hosts Grace Evans and Moses Brattrud. Stay informed on the top stories on life, family, and religious freedom. Get the facts, stand for truth. Hello and welcome back to the Family Beacon podcast. My name is Grace Evans. I am here today with a very, very special guest, General Counsel of True North Legal, our very own Renee Carlson, who is absolutely hitting it out of the park on so many levels, both this week and last week, fighting some really radical pro-abortion legislation. And that is exactly what we will be talking about today. Last week, Moses and I promised you that we would be discussing it in depth with our attorney. Renee is here to do just that. She is so amazing. We're so pumped to hear from her. And so we are filming this on Thursday, January 26th, and tomorrow, which is Friday the 27th, the Minnesota Senate will be hearing PRO Act. They will be having a House floor vote on PRO Act, and we don't know how it's going to go right now. It's looking very, very tight. Right now we're just praying, we're fighting hard, we're fighting for life for women and children in our state. By the time you get this podcast, we may have a result and you guys will be updated on that. The debate may go on late into the day. We're not sure yet, but just wanted to let you know that's the timing for us right now. So we have a lot of pro-life allies working around the clock right now to thwart this lethal bill, PRO Act, which we have kept you in touch about. Renee Carlson is one of those amazing pro-life advocates. That's why we're having here on the podcast today to break down really what PRO Act would do, because that's so important for people to understand from a legal analysis perspective. Sure. So we are honored to have you on today, Renee.
Good to be here with you, Grace.
Yeah,
and thanks for all your work, too. I know you're on the front lanes as well,
yeah,
helping people understand what's going on at the Capitol and being out there advocating for life initiatives and for these preborn children and also women who need our care and need our support.
Absolutely, Renee. It's the honor of my lifetime, honestly, to be in this fight, and I know that you think the same way. So, Renee, you just came straight from the Capitol. At our new office, we're right next to the Capitol.
Right.
You were there this morning. You've been there all week. Tell us what the energy is like at the Capitol today.
Well, I've been at the Capitol over the past month, really, since the PRO Act was introduced, both in the House and in the Senate, and I think that there's an increasing momentum. There's an increasing concern by legislators that this legislation is incredibly extreme. It is so out of step with Minnesotans and Minnesota values. It's honestly out of step with even the voters. The Democratic Party is saying that this is what the voters wanted. In fact, we know that from statistics, about 70% of Minnesotans do not want this. They do not want extreme, unfettered access to abortion, and they know the consequences. So I think, at times there is a lot of energy and hope, because we know where hope comes from on our side, regardless of the outcome. There's also a type of intensity that, I haven't experienced a while, probably because the Capitol is closed, but now that it's open, being in person, there is an intense debate about humanity and even the preborn and when they deserve rights and who they are, and also how we best care for women in Minnesota. So there's a lot of emotions. Both sides admit to having a lot of emotions. But there's definitely an energy. It's just, all sorts of emotions that just make up a kind of bustling and crazy time over at the Capitol. And of course, this isn't the only issue that we're tracking, but it is one of the most significant ones that we are working on right now.
Absolutely. And we're going to have Renee on to talk about other bills, other issues in the future. So stay tuned. You're going to be hearing more from her, some more of her expert legal opinion. But for now,
I think, you know what? Sorry, just not to interrupt you.
Yep.
I did. So
no, you're good.
But, I think one thing that I want Minnesotans to know is that the pace of this legislative session is quite incredible. There was an article out today in Boyce Olson where Speaker Hortman was quoted talking about, she was even acknowledging the pace. And one thing that people need to know is that anyone from legislators to advocates, lobbyists, they're not even given a fair notice for what's coming next. So we could have something as short as, between, testimony is often due the day before the hearing. So if there's a hearing on a Tuesday and then the testimony is due the next day at 10:30, you have less than 24 hours to turn around your testimony. Not only that, but now we are getting 90 seconds at most to be able to sit and testify. That is not a robust discussion. No. And I think historically of the founders and what government is, and this just is not what I think that how the government is intended to function. There really is closed discussion and closed debate. It's out there, but it's more of it feels like more of a formality. Are we really here to discuss these issues, or are we here just to ram things through and get it done? And it really feels like a swift pace for some really incredible legislation that's going to affect Minnesota for quite some time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, only 90 seconds to discuss when life begins, and
I mean, to distill, I'm going to show this later,
to discuss all of this.
To distill just one bill in 90 seconds, and for the public to have the opportunity to be heard.
Right, absolutely. And let me tell you, even though Renee only has 90 seconds to make the case for life in this, she's knocking it out of the park. We're going to talk. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, and we'll have her amazing testimony linked in the description, so you can watch that. She's had so many great testimonies, but one in particular we really want you guys to watch. All right, so let's break down, Renee, if you will, please break down the PRO Act for us from your legal position.
Sure. Well, the PRO Act, otherwise known as House File 1 and Senate File 1, provides a fundamental right to abortion and codifies the right to abortion through all 9 months of pregnancy. There's no limits, there's no restrictions to protect preborn children and women at all. It's really an egregious bill. And it also, it provides this right to all individuals. So that we're not talking about women anymore. We're talking about all individuals, and that means minors.
Yep.
That means vulnerable adults. That's just a larger category than what we've operated under currently in Minnesota. And we've said many times that this bill is pretty extreme, and in fact, if it passes, this unfettered access to abortion is going to be on par with North Korea, China, and Canada, other countries that allow abortion up until birth, and that's really astounding. That's horrible, and that's really sad. And so all of you listeners that are concerned about that, I do encourage you to reach out to your legislators, because they need to hear that this is not the values of Minnesota. The bill, as I said, it creates it creates rights for individuals in Minnesota, and this fundamental right is a right to reproductive health care, which is
reproductive health care.
Right. So what you'll be hearing, as I continue to describe it, there's just a broadness to this bill, and it's very vague. It doesn't really describe what is reproductive health care. Well, that includes family planning services, but what are family planning services? So it's really words that create a catch-all to all kinds of fertility services and other things. So they're passing a bill that is supposed to codify a fundamental right to abortion, when in fact it could be much more than that, but the authors of the bill are not willing to state that at all on record in these hearings. So the broadness of the bill is really concerning.
Oh, absolutely.
And the bill, while it's broad, it explicitly states that children and adults have a fundamental right to access other reproductive services, which include sterilization and contraception.
I've heard of this so much recently, Renee, but every time I hear it, it's so sad. Every time.
Right.
It just kind of rips your heart out that there are legislators truly in Minnesota that think this is good for Minnesota. They think it's good for Minnesota's children to have the right to be, the so-called right to be sterilized.
Right. Yeah. It's incredible and quite concerning. And again, because there are no health and safety protections written in this bill or the other bill that I'm going to talk about, there's just an open-ended access to abortion and no regulation at all. That should concern all of us. That should concern people that are proponents of abortion and opponents of abortion. In what other industry do we have something that is so unregulated? Right. And I've sat in the Commerce Committee and I've seen that's not the case for other things in Minnesota. But for abortion, there's a free pass.
Yeah,
it's just really inconsistent.
So inconsistent. Any other notes on PRO Act that our audience should be aware of, Renee?
I think one other interesting thing is that it prohibits any cities or local governments from regulating abortion, which I think is really interesting. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and see what happens when this all shakes out.
Absolutely. I know an amendment was proposed on that, I think in the House floor session, and that was shot down, unfortunately, by pro-abortion representatives. But we'll see if that amendment comes up again in the Senate tomorrow. Right. So we'll be watching for that. Well, thanks for that excellent debrief. That's so important for our audience. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
Let's move on and ask the question. I've heard this a lot from some people in our audience, and this is a very common misconception, I would say. The question is, doesn't PRO Act just already uphold existing Minnesota laws? That's the question. Can you respond to that?
Well, that would be the argument of the authors of the bill and the proponents of the bill, and in fact, that is not true at all. The Minnesota Supreme Court in Doe v. Gomez interpreted our state constitution to provide a fundamental right to abortion, but it also held that taxpayer-funded abortions are covered for women under MA, but in very limited circumstances. So this bill does much more than that. It goes beyond that. And when Roe v. Wade was overturned, that certainly opened up the door for revisiting certain cases under Minnesota law, and including when and how late can somebody get an abortion. But regardless, even if that's on the table, even if we could say that, well, now that Roe v. Wade is overturned, actually Minnesota, based on our case law, does provide this fundamental right to abortion all throughout pregnancy, I think the question we need to be asking is, why is that okay? Why aren't lawmakers holding people accountable?
It's so true.
They're not.
It's so true.
So, that's the concern. I mean, is this really what we want codified in the law? So, yes, I think it's different from Doe v. Gomez. I think it's much more than Doe v. Gomez. And again, we'll just see what happens tomorrow.
Yeah, and you were also talking about previously, too, the fact that this bill really just opens the door for children to be sterilized. So many other terrible things. I mean, there's a lot more packed into this bill than simply just abortion.
That's right.
And so there's so much more in there. And so definitely PRO Act puts on the table so many drastic measures that would push against everything we fight for, push against life, family, and religious freedom. So thank you for that excellent response there, because that is such an important question to be asking. All right, so I want to move on a little bit to your amazing, actually, let's move on now to the Howto of PRO Act.
Sure.
Because there's another bill coming down the pipe, right, Renee?
Right.
There's another bill coming down the pipe that pro-abortion legislators are trying to push. And we have dubbed it the Howto of PRO Act because basically what it does, Renee will expound more, but what it does is it says, okay, if PRO Act is enacted, here's how it's going to happen. Here's how it's going to work. So please break that down for us from your legal position.
Sure, that's House File 91 and Senate File 70. I think the testimony you're referring to is I testified in the Senate on Senate File 70. But yes, I've called this bill the How-To bill because it's really the mechanics of providing a fundamental right to abortion, because we really do have some health and safety protections for women and young girls seeking an abortion, even for the preborn and the criminal statutes. Well, all of those are being repealed. There's a number of things being repealed. And I'm going to try to remember them all. I think one of the most significant things being repealed in House File 91 is the Infants Born Alive Act. So we will no longer have protections for these preborn babies born at 35 weeks old are left to die on a cold metal table without any help. If a baby is able to breathe and function on its own, it deserves the medical care as a human being. And
Absolutely.
This is being stripped away. And there is not one member who is a proponent of this bill that is willing to speak up and say, actually, this has gone too far. We should keep the Infants Born Alive Act. They're also repealing the reporting requirements. We are known to have one of the best reporting requirements in the country, and that will be removed. And the argument is that because we have these reporting requirements, a lot of heinous things are not happening in our state because abortionists are being held accountable. Without these reporting requirements and without the Born Alive Act, we're kind of living in the Wild West, and that's not even, the tip of the spear. That's just one of the things being removed. I said in my testimony that reptiles and cattle will have more protections than women, young girls, and preborn children under the law, and that's so true. I was looking up actually the animal cruelty protections in our laws, and they are much more robust than what we will have if House File 91, Senate File 70 passes. So I'll just tell you, it repeals, as I said, all the health and safety protections for women and young girls. But what does that look like? That's a repeal of informed consent, where you're just getting information about an abortion. What happens when you get an abortion? Shouldn't all women be informed of what an abortion does to your body and what's happening? I mean, any other procedure, right, Grace? I mean,
women deserve the right to know what they're undergoing.
Exactly. And you'd think that as a medical professional, you'd want people to be informed so that they can't be surprised. Parental notification, which has been coming up, and that's a significant issue. We have where our current law, just says that parents must simply be notified if their daughter is having an abortion, and there has to be an attempt to notify. But the girl can still get a judicial bypass. So, I mean, and unfortunately, that's not really hard. So it's still too extreme to try to notify a parent and still have an opportunity to get an abortion without them knowing through judicial bypass. Apparently, that's extreme. So that's going to be stripped. Waiting periods. Having 24 hours to simply think about, I am making a critical life decision. Is this what I want to do? Does she really want to do that? Should she be going through with this abortion? Well, that's not going to be there anymore if this passes. The physician-only law, which says that a physician, a trained medical professional, will be performing an abortion and not...
Oh, that one really gets me.
Well,
that one gets
today was
me.
interesting because the question was asked in committee, can anybody then perform an abortion? And there was no specific response to say that this will be handled by medical professionals. It's left unopened. Who can perform an abortion was not a question that the author of the bill was willing to talk about and expand upon, and that's a problem.
Absolutely, it's a problem. I think what you're really highlighting here, Renee, is the fact that the pro-abortion legislators have gone so extreme on all of this.
Absolutely.
It should not be a partisan issue to protect infants that are born alive after an abortion. That is
Right.
a living, breathing human being. Of course, we believe that every child deserves to be protected from the moment of conception, but this should not be partisan.
Right.
I am shocked that this is a partisan issue. It should not be a partisan issue to protect minors from undergoing abortions without parental notification. Why? Because we don't want children, we don't want young girls being forced to get abortions by abusers.
Right.
We don't want that in our state. Every single girl in Minnesota deserves to be protected from that.
Right.
And so these should not be partisan issues, and yet it seems like all of these legislators, these pro-abortion legislators, are making this very partisan. They're drawing a line in the sand. They're making it crystal clear that they do not care about protecting life. They don't care about protecting women and
Right.
girls, which that's their whole slogan. Of course, we care about women, we care about girls. We're for equality, we're for women's rights. Well, how can you say that you're for women's rights if you're denying all of these things to women and girls? You're denying basic protections to girls.
Right.
And not only that, but as we've talked about before, and you know, obviously you agree with this, but women's rights begin in the womb. I mean, the basic
Right.
step, a basic first step in human rights and rights for women is to let them be born.
Right.
Let them be born. And so you're doing a great job highlighting that extremism.
Well,
Renee.
there's questions about, what about sex-selective abortion? What about abortion based on disabilities? The proponents of the bill and the authors of the bill are not willing to answer any of those questions. They are not willing to say
Red
on
flag.
record that there are any limitations to any of this bill. And again, going back to something beyond abortion, going back to sterilization, what is reproductive health as defined in the bill? That is a question that's been left unanswered. And that's concerning, and we, the people, deserve to have those parameters. It's just really an astounding thing to sit through these hearings, and also to repeatedly have the question asked, when does a preborn child become a human, or when are they deserving of human rights? And specifically, we had the Public Safety Committee today asking the questions, making the distinctions between, at one point, this preborn child in the womb is a human deserving of protections under the law in the case of, let's say, a drunk driver, as I said in my testimony.
So true.
And a homicide. The person's
So
going to be charged.
true, yes.
The person is going to be charged for the death of both individuals. However, if a woman wants to kill that child through the act of premeditated murder, basically, suddenly it's
Calling
a fetus.
it as it is, Renee.
And it has no right. So, I mean, the very thing that is defined in statute as first-degree manslaughter is okay if it is it has the qualifier of abortion. I mean, that's heinous, but it's also inconsistent in the law.
Renee,
and it's going to
yes.
provide trouble. It's going to be troubling for policymakers. And, Minnesotans, you need to pay attention to this. This is happening at your legislature. Mothers, I just call on you to stay awake, stay alert, and know that this is the direction that things are headed, and it's moving so fast and furious. So I hope that this is informative so that, while you're trying to multitask, you can hear the update about what's going on and let people know that, how you feel about this.
Renee, thank you so much. Love your passion. You inspire me. You get me fired up when you're talking about these things. So briefly, just tell us, you testified, you had an amazing testimony against the Howto of PRO Act. Again, we're going to have that link in the description for you guys so you can watch the full thing. But multiple news outlets have picked that up. Tell us about someone who actually retweeted it, and then a very key news outlet that actually quoted you.
Yeah, we had some really good coverage by the Federalist. I really appreciate their coverage, raising the profile. We had a couple of other news media outlets as well, not only sharing some quotes, but also my testimony. And I just really appreciate raising the visibility of this really critical issue. And my team knows I am an Answers in Genesis fan. I am a Ken Ham fan. And so Ken Ham did retweet us, and his his VBS curriculum, going a little bit on a caveat here, but was all about Psalm 139 last year, all about sanctity of life. And so really appreciate Answers in Genesis retweeting this and raising the visibility, helping people understand that, there's no place to sit on the sidelines now. It's time to show up, everybody.
So Renee, I wanted to ask you about a Star Tribune article that you wrote. You are just everywhere right now. True North Legal is doing awesome work fighting for life, and you are doing amazing work. And I really wanted to highlight your editorial. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. The Star Tribune editorial board wrote an article when House File 1 and Senate File 1 were dropped, really championing the bill and saying anyone that doesn't agree with it is out of step with Minnesota, almost like condemning people that don't agree with unfettered access to abortion. I was a little fired up.
Yeah.
So I said someone has to respond and say, actually, the extremity of this is not with those of us who do not champion the bill, but it's for those of us who actually might even be moderate. Somehow it's extreme to want parental notification. It's extreme to simply want medical information. It's extreme to want a physician only to perform an abortion, and so on and so on and so on. And so we really highlighted the fact that those who are extreme are the ones championing this fundamental right to anything under the sun bill, not those of us that want to have some safeguards and parameters. Simple health and safety protections for women, young girls, and preborn children in the state of Minnesota. How is that extreme?
Wow. Dynamite, Renee. Dynamite. Guys, read that article. It will be linked in the description. We have tweeted about it. We have posted about it. But you guys, if you have not read it already, you're missing out. So please read that article. Okay, so Renee, we're coming in for a landing here, and I want to just thank you so much for all of your expert advice, your legal insight. We really appreciate it. Our audience appreciates it so much. We're going to have you on again multiple times because we need your input. But I'm wondering, there's probably people watching right now that are totally with us. There's people that are totally with us, and they say, yes, we need to stand up. We must rise up for women and children in our state. So let me ask you, how can Minnesotans get involved in the fight for life and combating this abortion extremism?
Right. Well, we have talked a little bit about communicating with your legislators, making your voice heard, whether it's emails or phone calls. Also, we have a really exciting event that you know about.
Yes.
United for Life coming up on February 28th. So we encourage all Minnesotans, regardless of where this vote goes and regardless of where this legislation goes, we need to let these legislators know that we are not backing down, that the pro-life movement and that those of us in Minnesota who are against House File 1 and Senate File 1 are not backing down. So show up at United for Life. It's going to be a great day. We're going to have a rally. We're going to have opportunities to connect and meet with your legislators. And you know, that sounds intimidating, but it's really not. We're going to have groups with people who will take you to your legislators, and we're going to help inform you. We're going to have education initiatives, help people learn how to talk to their legislators, and it really is something to come down, as you said earlier, and experience the energy of the Capitol, to be a part of your government, to be a part of the things going on, the critical decisions that are being made. So we just encourage you to come down to Unite for Life. Also, even though there may be some discouragement now with the potential vote to come this weekend, we can find hope. And when you are surrounded by many Minnesotans who also share that hope, it is certainly a point of encouragement. So please come to United for Life February 28th, and we hope to see you there.
Yeah, Renee, I'm so excited for that event. Renee is actually going to be speaking. She's going to be one of our speakers. So come hear Renee speak at the event. That's going to be incredible.
Lots of amazing individuals as well. Our life coalitions are participating, and that's also been a really sweet thing is all the life groups in Minnesota have come together, have been working so hard together. So know that there is a united coalition who is working for life, and that's really exciting for our state.
I want to close out with, I was going to read the direct quote for you guys, but I couldn't find it fast enough. There's a quote in Lord of the Rings where I think Gandalf was talking to Frodo, and they're talking about, how things are really dark in the world right now. And Gandalf said something along the lines of, well, all we have to do is to decide what we are going to do with the time that has been given to us. And I think that's a really good reminder.
Totally.
We know as Christians that faithfulness is never futile.
Yeah.
It is never futile.
Right.
And we have to fight that sense of futility if we ever start feeling like, this work, we're working so hard, and yet we might not be able to stop this. Faithfulness is not futile for the Christian. Right. What God calls us to is faithfulness. And if we are faithful, He's going to say, well done, good and faithful servant. He is not going to judge based on our outcome. We're going to press on for wins. We are never going to stop fighting. But ultimately, if we're faithful, that is what God calls us to, and that's the note I want to leave us on. So,
and you don't know what's happening in the hearts and minds of so many other people. And I know, regardless of this vote, that people are impacted and affected. There are thousands of testimonies out there about women who have been impacted by the abortion industry, about children that have been impacted by the abortion industry. This is a thoughtful time, regardless of the vote, of the politics. We don't know the inner workings of the heart, but we know God is working. And so I appreciate that, Grace. It's important to step back and think about who's in charge and who's running the show, and thankfully it's not totally us.
It's so true. I am so grateful more than ever that we are on God's side. Amen? Amen. All right, you guys, this has been the Family Beacon Podcast with Grace Evans and Renee Carlson. We will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening to or watching this episode of the Family Beacon Podcast from Minnesota Family Council. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you're up to date on life, family, and religious freedom. You can follow us on Instagram at MN Family Council and subscribe to us on YouTube to watch our content. Get the facts, stand for truth.